Today's video will be called The Happening. Um, this is a movie that just came out recently, whose lead actors are Mark Wahlberg and Zoe Deschanel, if I'm pronouncing these words right. You know, the oddball thing about this movie is that I don't know if it was done on purpose or not. Of course, there's the surface story, which is plausible. Uh, uh, it isn't necessarily plausible by way of today's present understanding of things, that we sit there and say, well, plant life and animal life are not intelligent. They don't go through any kind of evolutionary cycle. Uh, Once a plant, always a plant, and so on. Myers, however, Billy Myers, whichever, shows instances and photographs where all of creation goes through a cycle of change, of evolution, as it were, spanning many millions of years. But be that as it may, when there's different thoughts about that. It all sort of more or less ties into a string theory, uh, various different things that are going on, different particles, so on and so forth, that are sort of tied together to make a theory about how everything works, or how everything is, somewhat outside the Einstein theory, or even the present one that came out in the last couple of years, the quark, where they took I think the neutron, and they busted it open. They found 3 quarks in it. Each quark has 200 particles. Then several years later, someone got a Nobel Prize for showing that there were fields around the nucleus, and gave it certain names like love and joy. And I think there were colors. Maybe the colors were associated with the names, and there was force fields that couldn't be seen but detected. Because machinery got more fanciful, so they're able to do these kinds of analysis. They don't need to do atom smashing anymore on a large scale like they used to. They still have these machines, though. I mean, they have one overseas, and they have the one up here, I think, in Michigan. They were supposed to build one in Texas, but that's all been replaced by a atomic blasting device, whatever the hell it's called. I think it's in Connecticut. It takes up 2 stories, and it's does a small atomic reaction in a chamber, which the whole thing is lined with lead, and very complicated type machine, I'm sure, but with better better instruments to analyze what's there, when they don't do those long trajectory things. Okay, but the basic story of the happening is that people all of a sudden got killed. And of course, right away it was assumed that it was a terrorist attack, or that it was the government doing it, or the government or somebody outside the government. Then it turned out, of course, they made a very weak argument for it. To get to that point, was that the plants themselves were emitting certain kinds of viruses, and they were killing large groups. And then, as it went on, they were killing smaller groups. And the interesting thing is that they come to this conclusion when they're on a train. The train is an interesting place, because it was part of the diagrams that were drawn about relativity, using the train as an example for relativity. Not that the train is the only example, but that was what was used in the past. 2 trains are traveling towards each other, and one's going one speed, one's going the other speed. What is the actual speed? Can't get anybody to determine. Well, for a long time it was assumed that nobody could determine the speed of the other thing, because you had to be behind it in order to be able to determine it, or you have to be sitting on the ground stationary. Now they have stuff the Highway Patrol has, where they can measure the distance of the object coming towards them rather rapidly with a computer, and based on how it's closing in on, they can determine the speed from that, so that each point that the in this case, the highway patrol is approaching the other car from the opposite direction, whether it's sitting still or moving on that. Each point that it makes a measurement becomes a relativistic point, and doesn't have to wait for a. But here again, these are based on better technological applications and instrumentations in order to figure these things out. So in the case of the happening, they come down to almost to a compressed point where 3 rows converge into 1, and they're all together as a group. When because they already left as a group from this train to go to this other city, where they said that there was this one city that wasn't being hit. Then they found out that the location wasn't the issue. The issue was the concentration. So they broke up into several groups from that, and then see. So process selection. So you have the evolution. The evolutionary model is in there, the survival of the fittest, process of selection. You have a little bit of string theory in there, and then what else? You have the fact that the three rows verge into 1. You have compression, similar to the analysis is done on universe growth. The universe grows and expands. And finally it compresses, and then it expands again, and this time it expands in a small manner, and then these guys go off, and then eventually they were starting to die off because the plant life got more specific now. They got much smarter. They learned the reason to go after into. So the final thing that finally made it work for them is that they said, no, I love you so-and-so, and I got to come out in the field, and we're going to gather together in love. And of course love in this case conquered all, but it made that's the surface story. But the bigger, the more important thing that might have actually happened, of course, in the story, it shows that the plant life had subsided on that for no reason on that, which that doesn't completely make a lot of sense. But that the 2 people that were left were almost like an Adam and Eve, with of course the little girl there. They were an immutable strain, and they had figured out how to beat the cataclysm, as it were, from the plants. Kind of like the Omega Man movie that was done a long time ago with Charlton Heston. He had the blood that was for the New Age and so on. Just kind of a slur on Christ, and the 2 man and woman left was kind of a slur on the creation story. But here's an interesting thing about the names of the people. I mean, this is really very, very peculiar. Mark Wahlberg. Mark denotes a spot or a point. Wall, phonetic for wall, W-A-L-L, denotes a 2-dimensional sphere or 2-dimensional plane. Berg, having to do with a group or a locality, something along the line of a 3-dimensional thing. Mark Wahlberg, almost as if it was a physics or mathematical model. 1st dimension, 2nd dimension, 3rd dimension. Mark, point, wall, 2-dimension. Berg, 3-dimension. As Mark Wahlberg decides to make decisions within the movie, those decisions in itself, as he moves, it puts him in the 4th dimension, time. But as he actualizes and directs it in a certain way, then you can say that's the 5th dimension, because it isn't just a random movement; it's thought-out movement. However, in the bigger scope of things, there's a specific movement or random movement that all things are possible. Relative to time, we say specific or random. Take time out of the equation, you have neither or either on that. So then the girl's name is interesting. Her name is the girl that is Zooey Deschanel. Des means of. So of the channel, Zooey is a closer meaning to the word zoo with a Y at the end. In this case, EY means that it's more of the zoo. The zoo, again, is a class, is a grouping on that. It's interesting. From 1st, 2nd, 3rd dimension, they join, they become a couple, the Berg and the Zoe, or the Zoo, when and then they become the new nucleus for future society. Now, at the end of the movie, here's an interesting. The guy's walking down the street with this other guy, but he's on the opposite side of him, and he turns around, and looks behind him. It's a mixture of the 2001, but it's also a throwback to the pictures by what's his name, Lewis Carroll in the Parallel Universe.